Good morning, everyone. The focus for today's session is building OpenUI5 apps based on FHIR. A short introduction about myself. I am Kishore. I'm here representing SAP Health Organization of SAP SE from Germany. I am basically an application developer by experience. I'm in the IT industry for more than 8 years, out of which more than half of my career that I'm currently spending on healthcare development topics. My major focus is on building applications for clinicians, researchers, end users, in this case, patients. FHIR. I am sure the images on the screen, most of them would be very much familiar to all of you. It's an XML representation of FHIR. So the first one is basically a FHIR patient resource. The second one is FHIR message. And the third one is FHIR document. So we have been very comfortable in seeing these XML representations of various informations in the FHIR format. Now let's imagine I'm a patient. I would like to know my personal details or maybe my discharge summary document. So I go into my health portal. So now I'm going to log into my health portal and then this pops up. Wow, this is a representation of my personal information in a JSON format. Now, does it still sound familiar and comfortable to all of you? No. Why? I can still see my name, my gender, my image in the form of a data. What's the problem? The thing is, human interoperability is good, but that's not enough. What we need is a user experience. What we need is a user interface that could enable users make sense of their own data. That's why now we focus on building user interfaces, UI applications based on FHIR. The basic Lego blocks of the knowledge skills that we would need to understand the session are experience on web development topics, knowledge on the UI development framework, and of course FHIR, which I don't doubt we have been talking about FHIR. We are in the mid of 3-day conference. And last but not least, OpenUI5. We will go into details of OpenUI5 in a moment. So UI5. UI5 is a framework that SAP had built to bring intuitive and consistent user experience across different SAP portfolio solutions. UI5 runs on every modern browsers that are available today, and it's adaptive on any device. UI5 as such is not a proprietary technology, but rather it's built on top of various web standards that are available today. For example, HTML5, CSS, JavaScript.
And there is also a lot of possibilities for extensions, which means that the framework doesn't always have to be used as it is, but the developer community can always extend and build anything that they want from the framework itself. And most of the SAP's flagship products, like HANA or S4 HANA, they're currently using UI5. So what is that UI5, which has this also called as SAP UI5 and OpenUI5? The only difference is that SAP UI5 is an internal version, whereas the OpenUI5 is an open sourced version for the community. So as we went production with SAP UI5, and then we found out intuitive the user experiences with SAP UI5, and then we decided to open source it in 2013. And since then, OpenUI5 is available in the community for everybody to use, not really SAP customers or partners, but anybody who's working on web development topics, they can leverage the strength of UI5, so that's OpenUI5. And the immediate question that you might get in your mind is, okay, there are already plenty of frameworks available. For example, the popular ones that you might be aware of could be Angular or React. So there's a quick chart which basically compares how is different from Angular and React. So especially I would like to highlight the part where we call it enterprise grade ready applications, right? So what does it mean on the enterprise grade? I mean, what are the things that basically cover inside enterprise grade? is about the localization and internationalization support. So you build your applications in certain language, but then you wanted to make it quickly available in other language because you have customer coming up in other country. So how fast you can make your application available in multiple languages. You can make the internationalization feature of UI5 to do that. And accessibility standards. So as we all know, we are focusing open community and all this. So we also look at accessibility aspects so that the application is accessible for every user for that matter. And security. So we all know how sensitive the healthcare data could be, and then it's important that we also focus on the security aspect of it when we are building enterprise applications and the healthcare topic especially. So there's a lot of things that you can always check what's pros and cons of each framework. Probably what you might be wondering is what SAP UI5 or the OpenUI5 lacks is or not that meant for us basically a native development. So SAP UI5 is basically meant for a web-based application development, not really on the native side. So when I say it's responsive on all devices, it basically means let's assume you have a web application that your user wanted to get access it in different devices. Could be, let's say it's a tablet or a mobile or a laptop. And if the user is especially frequently switching between these kind of devices, with the applications which are built with UI5 would enable consistent experience across these devices. You don't really have to make any extra effort to make your application really mobile ready or tablet ready. So it just works out of box, irrespective of the size of the device. So let's get into the architecture a bit. So there are different layers that we talk about. So basically the layer what you see on the top is your device, or basically where you access these applications from. And then the client, this browser where the application would be running. And then especially we have pieces like a model, view, and controller. I will talk about this in detail. And then the last layer is your resources. The resources could be some kind of a files or static files that you might need, or some kind of a third-party libraries that you need in your application, or maybe even connection to other apps. And then finally, your database layer where you have your data. And then your gateway server is basically a system which takes care of accessing this data and then making it readily available for the application. So now let's get in detail about the second layer, which is basically this model, view, and controller. So that's MVC pattern that probably you might be aware of. So the view is basically something responsible for the interface itself. So like, for example, if you assume a web page which has a forms, buttons, any of the UI elements, so all this is basically defined inside this files on the view side. And then the controller is a file that is basically responsible for the behavior of your application. Like when you have a button, then what should happen, or how should the UI react when you click on a button, or how should some input field or some fields respond based on the fields that you enter. So all this kind of a behavior is written inside the controller. And then the model, the most important part, which is basically kind of an application memory, which is acting as a cache, which responsible for taking the data from your database and then making it available readily for your view or controller at any point in time that you might need. And then the interesting concept here is basically the data binding. So the data binding is something basically responsible for making the data which is available in your memory available to the UI. So you have your data which is fetched from your database and then kept stored in the cache on the model. And then whenever you navigate between the different screens, or when you do perform some operations on the UI, there should be also the data changes. So that's basically the way that data is binded into the UI. We will also see this in detail later. So to talk about the model, so there are different types of models which are inbuilt out of UI5. So these models can be classified into two different categories. So client side and server side, it basically depends on what kind of a backend API that you might be using for your application. So the server side is basically the OData models. So if you have OData support, and then you have it also different versions. So UI5 also takes care of these multiple versions. And in case if you have some kind of a client-side models, your server provides the data in the format of a JSON, or you have some XML files that you want to make use of as a data, or even some kind of resource bundles which are available as a client-side models. So to talk specifically about what is the job of the model, so it's basically requesting data from the server and making it available for the UI to always display it. and then also making sure that certain functionalities which are supported by your server is also handled, like thread operations on your resources. So this is basically the job of the model. The most interesting part of the UI5 is this thing. So what we are doing at SAP Health is basically we are trying to build intelligent healthcare solutions in order to bring better patient outcomes and increase operational efficiency. And we as a healthcare application development team, we want to focus on really adding business value to the customer. So we decided to leverage such a powerful framework like OpenUI5 to help us really build the interfaces for our applications faster. But still, what made this process slow down is that, as we have seen, UI5 framework is completely an industry agnostic, and then it don't have really healthcare support. I mean, we have been talking about FHIR, so I really don't have to go in detail about the things mentioned here. We know very well how important FHIR is, but still UI5 did not have the support for FHIR, so that was really slowed down. And we have decided to basically connect these two dots and bring up a new framework, which is basically OpenUI5 FHIR. So OpenUI5 FHIR is an extension of a UI5 framework, but it enables UI5 to talk FHIR. As we have seen in the models, it's basically initially supported only JSON, XML, OData, but now with this framework, we can enable UI5 applications to really talk and understand FHIR. And today, the UI5 FHIR consists of a FHIR model. So that's what we have been talking about, which basically handles the communication with the server and then takes care of the data storage, especially which is needed on the UI5 application. But what could also be made more further enhancements are like building certain UI5 specific controls focusing on the FHIR resources, like tables and fields. So why would somebody use this? Because as we clearly seen that the advantage is that the developers, especially the application developers, they can focus more on their business value, building their applications rather than spending time in terms of processing the data or working with any of the data manipulation activities. And then, of course, it brings us less code because the major data operation is kind of provided by the framework. So you have a less potential for bugs, and then you have to do a less maintenance. Yeah. So as we have seen the benefits, so what are the features that the OpenUI5 FHIR supports? So OpenUI5 FHIR is a resource independent, so you can work with any resources of FHIR, and you can perform the basic operations that you have, for example, filtering and sorting, but also the FHIR supports syntaxes like a slicing and value set. And you can also request resources in different request types, like a direct and bundle. And the UI5 FHIR model supports all the existing controls of UI5. I mean, I can tell you there are more than 500 UI5 controls which are available for the developers to readily take and build their UI application, and most of the controls are supported by UI5 FHIR. But it doesn't stop only with the basic controls, but there are even a complex controls like a tree table where you have a lot of hierarchies to be defined, and we also support such complex controls. I mean, that's one of the basic advantage for the community who's working with UI5 is that as there are a lot of controls already available, they don't really have to write any kind of UI development code specifically for that. They can quickly build their application. And it's not just the default controls. There are also communities building a lot of extensions, which is basically called custom controls. So even if they find certain controls which is not really fitting to their need, they can really extend it and build a custom control, and they're also making it available in the market as a custom controls for somebody else to use it. So the community is widely growing because of the availability of such a large amount of different UI controls. And the framework also supports all the FHIR operations. So we have spoke about the data binding concept, which is basically something which connects the data, making it available from the model, which is your cache, into the UI whenever you need it. So there are different types of binding possibilities. So in total, there are 4 different types of binding. The first one is context binding. So in case of a context binding, you can see it's basically about binding certain resource available completely into your interface. So let's assume you have a patient of ID XYZ, and then you want to display the entire information of this patient into a particular page. Like as I showed in the beginning, as a patient, I log into my health portal to just see my profile, and then I can list down all the patient's details, which includes the name, address, contact details, and everything. So this is basically binding particular resource completely into the view. So that's basically a context binding. And then the property binding, as the name suggests, it's all about binding one single attribute of your resource into the UI. So in this case, the example could be like a binding a gender of a particular patient into the UI field where it can show display the gender. So this is a property binding. And the list binding. The list binding is all about having more than one rows of the similar bindings. For example, you can have a table wherein you can display more than one column. So you can say like you want to list on all the patients in your clinical system with other different details, like let's say the gender, date of birth, and name, and anything. So basically, it's something like tables. And tree binding. So tree binding, as I said, where you have, let's say you have an hierarchy, and then you want to display your data in the form of a structure of a tree. Let's assume you have an organization, and your organization have, let's say, sub-organizations, and each sub-organization may have subunits. And if you would like to visualize this data in intuitive format, then you can use some of the available SAP UI controls on the tree-specific structure, and then you can use this binding to make your data just bind into this control so that it makes visually good for the users to play with these structures. So as we have seen a lot, now if you would like to use it, so how you can use, I mean, it's really, really simple. So all you have to do is you have to define as a dependency the project, the framework, through your, let's say if you are using NPM, then you can define it in the packages and on the dependency section just by mentioning the name of the library, OpenUI5 FHIR, and then the respective version. And once you have imported your framework, the framework is available as part of your project, and then you can create a model as simple as just few lines of code. So this is a set of lines that you need to add it as part of your SAP UI5 manifest JSON, which I will also show in a GitHub how you can do that. So all you have to do is you have to point to the FHIR repository, so FHIR server API, where you have your backend, the FHIR server, and then also mention which version that you are using. So with this, you are already creating a UI5 model, which already ready to talk to your FHIR. So let's get to the small demo, so I can show you how all these things that I have been talking connect into a working model. So this is just a sample. This is just a sample application where we have, let's say, just a login page, or we call it a landing page, and it has two different small tiles, which basically brings in different informations, let's say, about patients and organization. So how does this work? So I can quickly show you what happens in the background. So what you are seeing in the UI is basically an UI application built using OpenUI5, and it basically directly connects to some of the any of the FHIR server for that matter. But in this case, we basically have connected it to the HappyFHIR. So the HappyFHIR is the public one, and then it basically talks to this HappyFHIR, and then the data is basically displayed on the UI. So just looking at this screen, so I can show you how easy it is to connect your FHIR server with UI. So let's just quickly show you. Show you the sample. So here you can see there's a different folders like a controller, a view. So this is what we have been talking about. The view folder is where you keep all your files which are responsible for rendering your UI. And then the controller is a file where you have the basically a JavaScript code where it handles the behavior of your UI. So now if I just go into the view, and then I can see there are different XML view files. They are basically the UI controls, what you are seeing on the UI. So in this case, it's home.view.xml, which is basically the landing page where you saw these two tiles. And then here you can see the binding, which is basically pointing to patient. Maybe even before that, maybe I can show you how it's basically connected to Happy. So for that, I just go into my manifest JSON. This is where the connection is made. So for example, here you can see the data sources, and then under the FHIR URI, I just have this URL of a happy FHIR server. So this is the only thing which is needed here to make your application to know what is the backend. So as soon as you know this, the application can call this server and then create a UI5 model, and then next thing is what is a particular resource that the UI has to load. So that's what basically written inside the view itself. So for example, in the home page, and then you can see the basically the binding, which basically takes you to the patient resource. And then this is how the URL like this is being constructed automatically. And then you can see here the total number of patients is basically mentioned as an attribute total, and then this is binded in the UI under the value section just by this term. So this is the simple example that how you can quickly call a FHIR server and then make a data which is available from the backend, and then quickly show it on the UI with better user interfaces, right? So similarly below you also see it for the organization. So if I also can go a little deep into the UI and show you how it looks like. So let's say I assume I go into my organization to see what are my list of organizations. So it's basically a small list where it lists down different organizations. And then this is what I spoke about, the list binding. So it's a small list control wherein you just connect where it has to talk to in the backend, and then it just makes this information readily available in the UI. And if I go into patients, it's a similar list control, but then I can go also a little deeper into the patients and then see it's a small profile wherein I can connect the complete context binding of this OpenUI5 and then make the patient informations available, visible in the UI. So in this case, it's like some attributes are mapped, like first name and family name. And then it's not just read, but you can also make a different CRUD operation. So in this case, if let's say if I prefer to change something, I can just change and then just click off a button, and then this UI also makes this kind of a request to the API server to send this data and get it stored. So most of the complete data operation is completely taken care by the framework itself. So the UI is something just makes this call, and then everything is taken care in the behind. So if I come back to my slide. So the next thing is I would like to take a walkthrough of our API documentation. So we have explained also more in detail about the complete framework, how it works. So here you can see the API documentation as complete information that you need. For example, the models that we have been talking about, and then the context, and then how you can import this OpenUI5 FHIR library, and then how you can create the similar things. And then when you can go into getting started, so this is a section where we have also explained in step by step the example application that I demoed, how you can also build it quickly from your side, completely from scratch. So there are code snippets, and then the kind of a folder structure what you need for the views and controllers, and then the respective code as well. And then all you need to is just try it out with the sample example, then you will be able to build a similar FHIR-based UI. And we also have support for other things like, for example, slicing. So if you have doubt how to work with slicing, so they are completely clearly documented here. And then it's also with examples. So you know there's also a sample snippet for every concept that we have. So you know how to use slicing, and then also the references, reverse chaining, value set, filtering, and everything. So basically, the documentation is completely a one-stop for you if you're really trying to use OpenUI5 framework. And last but not least, we have decided to open source as well. Why? Because UI5 itself open sourced under Apache 2.0 license. It's available for free for the entire ecosystem who are working with the web development to use this application, build their interfaces faster. And we know how wide the FHIR community is. So we have decided to also open source this framework, OpenUI5 FHIR, so that the ecosystem can make use of this. And it's not just what only for partners and customers, but it also helps them in terms of building their solutions in a more cost-effective manner, and it also enables them, if in case if they are needed to extend our own FHIR-based SAP healthcare solutions in future. And then as we are building community of partners and customers, we know we could leverage our strengths, and then we can build things together. So I have some references. So especially if you're completely new to UI5, and then if you're trying to start with UI5, so the UI5 SDK is one stop for you to really get started with UI5. And then the API documentation, which I showed on the UI5 FHIR API, and then the repository where we have our project, and also the sample application. And then if you need to reach out to some of the experts, so you can always reach out to us through also the Slack channel on UI5 FHIR. So we are always available to help you if you need some support on this topic. And then, yes, if you want to get started, you can take the package out of NPM, and then you will be able to use it. So thank you, everyone. Also, this is my contact, so if you also prefer to reach out to me directly, I'm always happy to help you. And I'm also here until end of day tomorrow, so feel free to reach out to me. Would be happy to help. Thank you. Any questions? Yes?
To be completely clear, there's no SAP dependency?
No, no.
And can you build single-page applications with this?
Yes.
Or you only have the file server as a backend and nothing?
So for example, the sample application which I showed has nothing to do with SAP. It's completely a standalone UFA application which talks to FHIR.
But did you have additional backend for it?
No.
So it was completely run in the browser?
Yes. So that's what I showed. So there's a UI and which directly talks to the FHIR server in the backend. All you need to is just mention what is your FHIR server in the manifest JSON, and then it knows where it has to talk to, and then the model is created, and then you just need your JavaScript files which puts this UI controls on the UI. So
how much is the UI customizable?
So you mean the sample application or in general?
The
So I can show you for example, I have been telling the framework has a lot of controls. I can just quickly also show you an example or the UI5 SDK library, and to see basically what are the controls which are available. So you can just say, so as soon as you are in, and then you can just navigate to the samples, and then you can see there are different controls which are readily available. And then let's say for a simple example, if I just have to, let's say anything, and then you can quickly go into the application, and then you see how this particular control alone works here. And then if you like to use this control for your application, you can just take the complete code out of here. So this is the XML which is responsible for the view to render this control. And then if you have the action behind this control which is written inside this .js file. And then you have also the supporting fragment which renders this kind of a drop down which came down. And then it's a simple manifest JSON which has this kind of what are the files that you need. So you can also kind of download this completely from the SDK and then directly use it in your application. So there are a lot of controls available like this.
But there is a particular way how button looks like. Can I change?
Yes, you can change. So if you want to change the color of a button, let's say, or if you even want to completely change the shape of the button, you can do it. So that's what I mean. There's a lot of possibilities also for extensions.
Yeah. So I can make material design.
Yes, exactly. Mm-hmm. Yes.
When you open a FHIR resource or a general page, is there any mechanism to support data elements that you didn't bind to,
Mm-hmm.
to at least display them in a primitive way or a kind of generic way? Because one of the biggest problems in healthcare is that there's information available in something requested, but because you didn't expect the data elements to be there, you didn't bind it to a UI component, you don't want to leave that information behind.
I get your point, but currently, at least that's how the MVC pattern also currently works with UI5. So you have to tell the UI where the data is coming from and where it has to display the data from. Otherwise, the UI simply don't know what to. But you can always design your UI. Let's say you can look for a couple of things, not really do hard-coded binding, because as I showed, there's also the controller which is responsible for the actions. So you don't have to write the binding directly in the view file, but you can also derive it on your controller by writing your actions where it has to fetch from. So it not necessarily be directly on the view. It can also be from controller.
Are you using FHIR path expressions for the binding?
Yeah.
Well, then you could do something like get all descendants and create a list from that, I guess.
You can try that way as well, yeah.
Get a collection of
Yeah.
everything and then just.
Are there any plans for the future?
Yeah, as I showed, right now what we have is the FHIR model. So it's only the model part of it, but we can also extend it in a way that we build certain controls which could understand FHIR and then put the data directly, even let's say without any binding, but rather just directly talk to the FHIR server and then put this data. So that's what I showed as a UI specific controls, like a FHIR specific controls like a FHIR table, a FHIR field. So that could minimize, let's say, some dependencies which are tightly coming with UI5 sometimes. So we are actively looking also for the contributions from the open source community to the project. So we have to see also what contributions that we receive in future. Yeah.
Can you add any authorization to connecting to the server, or is this just only for public?
No, you can also make use of authorization, but at least in the example that we showed, we did not use. But that's why I also showed when I talk about enterprise grade ready. So we taken care of the authorization mechanism or the security part of it and all these things in mind.
Is smartphone fire supported?
Sorry?
Smartphone fire?
We haven't tried it. Maybe we can try that one. Okay. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.